Everybody has a challenge to his faith at one time or another. And maybe I ought not to say at one time or another, because we have challenges to our faith quite constantly. In the 73rd Psalm, there's an interesting dialogue that the writer of this poem carries on, really with himself. But in some sense, it's with himself and with God. It's a very lovely psalm, and it speaks of a challenge that this man had to his faith. And although he makes it a challenge to one particular thing, I want us to broaden the idea tonight and see it as every challenge to our faith, no matter when, no matter the circumstances. Because the principles that are laid down here are principles that certainly do apply, not just in one circumstance, but in many. I'm going to read the psalm to you from the New International Version. The wording will be just a little different, but why don't you follow along in the Pew Bible there, because we're going to make constant reference to this psalm, the 73rd Psalm. Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggle. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They are free from the burdens common to man. They are not plagued by human ills. Therefore pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence. From their callous heart comes iniquity. The evil conceits of their mind knows no limit. They scoff, and they speak with malice. In their arrogance they threaten oppression. Their mouths lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth. Therefore their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. They say, how can God know? Does the Most High have knowledge? This is what the wicked are like. Always carefree, they increase in wealth. And now the mood changes just a little bit. Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure. In vain I have washed my hands in innocence. All day long I have been plagued, I have been punished every morning. I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night I stretched out untiring hands, and my soul refused to be comforted. I'm sorry, I skipped. I thought that didn't sound like the psalm I was trying to read. Beginning with verse 15. I had said I would spend thus. I would speak thus. I would have betrayed your children. When I tried to understand all of this, it was oppressive to me, until I entered into the sanctuary of God, and then I understood their destiny. Surely you place them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly are they destroyed, completely swept away by terror. As a dream when one awakes, so you arise, O Lord. You will despise them as fantasy. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you. Yet I am always with you, and you hold my right hand. You guide me with your counsel. Afterwards you take me into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire but you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is my strength and my heart and my portion forever. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell all of your deeds. Well, this rather lengthy psalm tells us of the struggles of this man. These are struggles that we all have. The author of the psalm is a good man. He's a godly man. But he's a man who is struggling with his faith. I am actually convinced that if we do not own up to the struggles of our faith, that it's probably because our faith is weak. Everybody that I know who has a very strong faith admits to the struggles of his or her faith. Sometimes people think, well, that's a sign of weak faith in itself, isn't it? No, it just really is not. Athletes work out. They're already strong. If you look at the football games, you'll see that the arms of those players are about as big around as my leg, and they're full of muscle. But they constantly work out. Why? Because they know that the challenges of the next game will demand that they work out. And so the challenges of faith are not something that get in our way. They're something rather that we can meet and we can spread back, as this psalmist does. We can spread back the shades of our hearts and look within ourselves, and we can talk to God about who we really are, what we really are facing, and the weakness and the frailty of our own existence. And I think that's just exactly what this man is doing. It's interesting the way he starts the psalm. He starts the psalm by telling who he is and what he is and how he appreciates what God has done. And then he begins telling us something of his past. He begins by saying, surely God is good to Israel, those who are pure in heart. But as for me, listen to him, as for me, my feet had almost slipped. Have you ever been there? Probably most of us have. He says, my feet had almost slipped. I nearly lost my foothold. And here's the reason. For I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. Now, this is going to be his thing. I don't know what your struggle is. You don't know what my struggle is, but we have them, don't we? Now, as we read this, let's not think just of the psalmist and his struggle, because he had a struggle about the prosperity of the wicked. Maybe that's not my struggle. But whatever my struggle might be, let me see if I can find it within the verses here of this great psalm. He goes on and says, the wicked, they're prosperous. And it looks like everything good is happening to them. Why? I've asked this question so many times. Why do good people suffer persecution and bad people prosper? And there are all kind of simplistic answers to this. Well, you just think you're good. You know the story of Job. Job was such a great man, such a good man, and he had all this trouble that came on him. He didn't have any idea of why. You see, we saw the entry of Satan into this whole picture. Job didn't see that. And so when all of the adversity comes to him, his friends come around, and basically, if you want to call these guys friends, but his friends come around, you know, and they say, Job, you are evil. No, you're not evil on the outside, Job, you're evil on the inside. Job knew the purity of his heart. Job knew what kind of man he was, And he said, I'm not evil. Oh, yes, you are. Have you ever seen good people who suffered like you're suffering? And so the thing that happens here in the life of this man who wrote this psalm, he says, I envied. Now there's a key word that really it's key to a great part of this whole poem. He says, I envied, and I almost lost my footing, my faith. My faith almost gave away. When I was preparing this lesson, I sat down and thought to myself, last week, I just said to myself, which comes first? Envy that weakens my faith, or weak faith that causes my envy? I never did come up with an answer. And I don't know that there is necessarily an answer, because it seems to me that envy and weakening faith go together. Not necessarily one after the other, but they feed on each other. And so that's what he said. I see these people who are prosperous, and he described them, and he said they don't have any struggles. He says they're healthy and strong. He says their bodies are free from the hindrances and the burdens of ordinary people. He says they have no ills. Boy, these guys are getting along real well. But he says, look at their lives. Let me tell you about what they're like. And then he goes on and says, their pride is always evident, and they wear it like a necklace. And their clothes just depict the idea of violence. Now, I don't know what he had reference to, how they look or anything like that, but he is using word pictures here to say to us that these people are evil. Now, let's pause for a minute. Maybe that's not my problem. Maybe that's not your problem. What is my problem? What is your problem? What this fellow was doing was he was saying, God, I'm envious. God, I'm weak. God, I'm almost slipping away. And I don't understand it. Now, whatever it might be that is my weakness, whatever it might be that is my problem, let me put it in this context. Do I have the courage to tell God about the real secrets of my heart? The secrets of my heart that I don't want anybody else to ever know? Do I have the courage to separate this veil and say, God, look at me. Look at me the way I really am. And then, you know, while I was preparing this, I thought to myself, now wait a minute. Is it harder for me to face myself the way I really am, or for me to face God the way I really am? Now, I didn't come up with an answer to that one either, I have to tell you. But again, it seems that these things work together. When I really have to face myself and say, really, this is what I am, this is the way I am, that equips me, it seems, to be able to face God with the way I really am, with the real weaknesses that I have, the real temptations that I have. I don't think anybody here is tempted to go rob a bank. I don't expect anybody here is tempted to go kill anybody. And those are not the bad things. The bad things are the little things here that I'm constantly tempted with. Maybe to be arrogant or proud or whatever it might be. But this man had the courage. And I find this very, very difficult myself. He had the courage to say, God, look at me. God, help me to look at myself, because I'm standing on a slippery slope and I'm about to lose my footing. One of the things that we can do to regain our footing is just simply to look at ourselves. I want you to forgive me for something, because I'm going to tell you a personal experience that I had with this very thing. I used to be a strong legalist. And I got to thinking one time, I'm a preacher. I am telling people how to live. I'm telling people to be honest with themselves. And then I said to myself, maybe I am the biggest hypocrite in the whole church. Why do I love my wife? Why am I kind to my children? Why do I love my children? Why am I preaching? Why am I doing this? Is it all just to feed me? To feed my ego? Do I have any kind of a pure motive about any of this at all? And for the first time in my life, I began trying to come face to face with myself, and my word, I was 45 years old by this time. And I never had really faced myself. And I tell you, it was devastating until somebody reminded me of the great song, Amazing Grace. You see, and this relates somewhat to the things that were said this morning, but you see, the only way we can face ourselves and survive is to face ourselves in reference to the grace of God, the forgiveness of God. You see, I don't really need to tell him anything about what I'm like. He knows it. And yet, you know, I'm a little bit like Cain and Abel when the Lord came after the sin of Adam and Eve, when the Lord came back and said, you know, where are you, Adam? Well, we were hiding from you. We were hiding. Well, that's a good one, isn't it? You hide from God. Well, kind of like Jonah, he thought he could run away from God, but somehow or another, even though I know God knows this about me, I don't want to talk to him about it. This psalm is the epitome, in my own opinion. It's the high point of a man being willing to open his heart to the Lord. Oh, these arrogant people, they even claim to rule heaven and earth. These arrogant people, they are popular with others. They have a big following and all of this. And they even go to the point that they ignore God. And then they said, what does he know? What does he know? I heard on the radio an interview just not too terribly long ago. It was a scientist, and he was talking about the universe. He was talking about the earth and the complexity of the systems of the earth. And the person doing the interviewing said, well, do you believe in design? Do you believe in God, a God of design? And this scientist, pardon my expression, this scientist made the stupidest remark that I have heard in a long time. He said, oh no, I don't believe in God. He said, this whole thing is way too complex for a divine designer. I thought, that is not very bright. That is really not very bright. But the whole thing is, we know that God knows, and yet we hesitate in talking to God about it. And these arrogant people are so arrogant that they say, what does he know anyway? And then there's an important that the psalmist makes here. He said in verse 16, he said, when I tried to understand all this, it was oppressive to me until I entered the sanctuary of God. I've heard people say, you know, yes, I've got trouble with my faith. Now, Jack, I don't want to hear any Bible. I don't want to hear about God or anything. Yes, I've got trouble with my faith, but I've got to work this out myself. What did the psalmist say? He said, I didn't understand this until I came into the sanctuary of God. You see, he was willing to put himself into a position so that God could help him. He didn't say to God, okay, God, I'm trying to figure you out now. I'm not even sure you're there. I'm not sure you exist. So I'll tell you what, I'm not going to think about you. I'm going to work this out by myself. And you know what God is basically saying to him? Hey, let me help you. Let me help you. I can strengthen you. And so the psalmist here says, I didn't understand this. He says, I tried to understand all of it, but it was so oppressive to me. That's a great statement. And it was so oppressive to me until I came to the sanctuary of God. The word sanctuary means a holy place. I came to this holy place of God. But he has described not only the wicked, but he has also described the righteous. In some ways, it's not a very good description. It's not a very encouraging description. He has said everything is vain. Sounds a little bit like the book of Ecclesiastes. Everything is vain. I'm trying to be righteous, he says. I'm trying to be good. It's not doing me any good. Not getting me anywhere. I'm not making any more money. I'm not getting a better job. Why be good? He says, I am innocent. I wash my hands in innocence. That didn't get me anywhere either. Here's what my righteousness really brought me. Number one, I am plagued and punished all day long. I wake up every morning to be punished for trying to live right. In the marketplace, in the workplace, at school, wherever it might be. That might be the very thing. If you're trying to live right, sometimes people will ridicule you. They will think you have some kind of an ulterior motive. Let me tell you a story of a man who worked for American Can Company down in Tampa, Florida. He attended the congregation where I was preaching. And he was a very good man. He had established himself, in spite of the opposition that was there, he had established himself as being a doggedly honest man. Well, he started out right at the bottom of American Can Company, and he worked himself up to where he was a part of management. And then they had a labor dispute. And nobody believed anybody on either side. You know how those things go. And so finally, the union steward said, we will not believe anything that American Can Company management says unless Wendell Strickland says it's so. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. When you survive this ridicule, when you and I survive the separation from our working colleagues and so forth, when we survive that, they have a profound respect for us somewhere in their own mind. And they know that if they want to do business with you, all they have to do is hear you make a promise. And they know that you'll stand for it. Why? Because they have learned what kind of character you are. And you see, God says to this man, God says, yes, you're in my sanctuary. You are in my holy place. Now I can help you. Don't fight the battle all by yourself. So he starts moving toward God. And he says now in verse 16, he says, when I tried to understand this, I was oppressed till I entered the sanctuary of God. And then he says, surely you placed them, you're talking about the unrighteous now, surely you placed them on slippery ground. Oh boy, now it seems like that everybody is succeeding except me. I am not succeeding. Everybody getting ahead except me. I'm not getting ahead. And it looks like that's my destiny. And then he says in verse 18, he says, but you place them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. You see, God doesn't settle all of the accounts at the time that I think that he ought to. There was a story of two farmers. One was a good Christian man and the other was an atheist. And the Christian man had a much more difficult time, and his crop didn't produce as much as the atheist produced. And the atheist kind of gloated over this. He said, well, your God didn't do you much good, did he? And his answer was, God does not settle all of his accounts in October. So I thought that was a pretty good thing here. He says, here's what's going to happen to those who reject God. And so now he begins making his way back to God. What does he do? Look at verses 21, 22. When my heart was grieved and my spirit was embittered, what was it like? He says, I was senseless and I was ignorant. I was like a brute beast before you. One of the first things we have to do is confession. I don't mean to say to God, God, I'm a sinner. That's not much of a confession. I'm talking about telling God why I'm a sinner. What have I done? Why am I sinning? What are my temptations? What is my activity? You know, when people go to a psychiatrist, they sit down and talk to that psychiatrist, and just getting this message out of their mind, able to talk to somebody about it, that's very therapeutic. And this is one of the therapeutic theories, is just the idea of being able to talk about it. You ever stop and think about prayer? Prayer can be so practically therapeutic. Therapeutic in a very practical way. Instead of saying, God, forgive me of my sins, when I pray personally, maybe I'd better say, God, here's some temptations I've been having and I've yielded to some of them. And go ahead and talk to God about the details of the weakness that you feel. Confession. And this fellow says, I was senseless, I was ignorant, and I was like an animal, a brute beast. The next thing was that in verse 23 and 24, he says next, yet I was always with you, and you hold my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterwards you take me into glory. A confession of my sins, and then a confession of the nearness of God. He's always present. He's always with us. And this is a part of our road back to him, is when we stop and say, God, I need you. Not selfishly, I need you for my very existence. Without you, God, I am lost. But he says, I'm learning that being with you means that you hold my right hand. To the ancient people, the idea of the right hand was very, very important. So much of what they did with their hands. And the right hand, most people were right-handed. No offense to left-handers. I have two children who are left-handed. But the right hand was the working hand. And so he says here, You hold my right hand. You give me that kind of support. But before I can receive that support, I've got to be open to it. I've got to come confessing. I've got to come approaching God for this nearness. And finally, he says in verse 25 and 26, who do I have in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire beside you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. That's the road back. He has experienced these terrible, terrible things, and now he finds the road back. The psalm speaks to us because the psalm is the story of our lives, the story of your life, the story of my life. We all have these kinds of challenges of one sort or another. I don't know yours, you don't know mine. But believe me, I have them and you have them. And so the key to this psalm is for us to see ourselves in whatever our situation might be and see how opening ourselves to God causes us to open ourselves to ourselves. Speaking to God in truth and honesty helped me to deal with the weaknesses of my faith. If you're not a Christian tonight and you want to become a Christian, or you have any reason for responding to the invitation of Christ, we're going to sing an invitation and we invite you to come. Let's stand together, please.